Hi, my name is Hannah, and welcome to Hand Me the Book. When I was thinking about things that I wanted to do in 2026, this has been one of those things that I've kind of been tossing around in my brain for a little while, and last year I finished grad school and felt like I had a little bit more creative capacity, and so Hand Me the Book, the YouTube channel, has been born. So for my first video, I thought it would be really fun to go through my top 10 books from 2025, and that should give you a little bit about me, get to know me a little bit and what I like to read. I hope that you'll join me for the future videos. So without further ado, let's get into my top 10. So first on my list, I actually have a classic. This is the first time that I have ever read this book, but this is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. And I remember when I was reading this, I was kind of really shocked because I went into this not really knowing anything about the book, but I knew I had really enjoyed 1984 and that this was a similar thing, and I knew friends in high school who had read it, but I just never had. And I really enjoyed it, and I think what's really cool about classics is there's so much about them that's still relatable today, and I feel like in my adult brain I understand more about the classics than I did as a teenager because you just live more life and you start to understand more things about life. So yeah, this was my number 10 5-star read for me this year. Really enjoyed this book and find it really, really relatable in today's culture. My number 9 book is none other than Emily Henry's Book Lovers. I'm not sure why it took me so long to read this book because I've loved everything that Emily Henry has written, but this is definitely one of my, if not my favorite book of hers. I just love the setup between the two writers, and that's always a recipe for a good book. But Nora is just, she's so me, and I just really enjoyed reading about a character who was so relatable to me personally. But the tension, the development of their relationship, the setting of this book, everything about it is just a book lover's dream. Literally, didn't mean to make that pun, but it really is just a book lover's dream, and the romance is just top tier, as all Emily Henry books are. Coming in at number 8, actually these next two books I don't have physically with me because I've loaned them out to people. I'll put it up here in a little icon or over here. Number 8 for me was The Favorites. I remember reading this book and I just could not put it down. It was so addicting. I loved how it was told through different mediums, and that there were interviews going on. It made it feel so fast-paced, and the tension and the relationships, and every time that I read a book like that, I remember feeling the same way when I read Carrie Soto is Back. I just get so invested in the sport because I'm like, wow, that's amazing. I didn't know anything about this sport really before I started reading about it, and I just developed this great respect for the people who do it. So I just really enjoyed The Favorites, and it made me really excited about the Winter Olympics coming up because now I'm really excited to watch all the ice skating and wonder about all the drama that goes on behind the scenes. Coming in at number 7, again I'll put the book up in one of these corners. This was actually a reread for me this year, but it still lived up to everything that I loved about it from the previous year when I read it, and it's called Last Christmas in Paris. This book is set in World War I, and it tells the story of a woman named Evie who's kind of left on the home front when her brother Will and his best friend Tom go off to the war, and she's kind of left on the home front. So it tells the story from two different sides of the war. It's told entirely through letters, and it is so heartbreaking and romantic and beautiful, and it just reminds you the realities of what war costs people on both sides, people who are on the home front and people who are actually battling the war themselves. But it's just so beautiful and romantic. I will say, if you're not a fan of slow builds and slow burn romances, this might not be the book for you because it is incredibly slow. But if you like that and you love the connection over the physicality in a romance, I would definitely recommend this book because the whole book is all about connection and all about the connection that they have, and you just watch them slowly fall in love with each other, and it is just so beautiful. And yeah, definitely one of the most romantic books that I have ever read. Coming in at number 6 is With a Vengeance by Riley Sager. I really didn't expect to like this. My book club read this in one of our months this year in 2025, and I'm really not a thriller girly. I don't really like thrillers. I'm kind of a scaredy cat. I don't like reading about things that potentially could happen. So I really did not expect to like this book. But I was reading it on vacation this year, and I finished it in like 24 hours because it was so addicting and so good to me. And if more thrillers were like this, I would read it. Like, there wasn't a lot of gore, there wasn't a lot of really descriptive scenes, I would say. It was just very, it was more about the mystery, I would say. It was more about the plot and figuring out like who'd done it. And it really kept you guessing until the end, which I've heard most of his books do, but I've also heard that most of his books are a lot creepier than this one. So I don't know that I will be reading too many of his other books, but I will say that I really did enjoy this one, and I found it to be incredibly fast-paced and addicting. And as somebody who does not really like thrillers or scary books, I really enjoyed the suspense in this one. Coming in at number 5, if you've read any of her books before, you know that Jennifer Lynn Barnes never misses with any of her books. I wasn't really sure what to expect with this one. The plot is that there are these kids who have these special abilities that get recruited by the FBI to work for them and help solve cases using these special abilities, which sounds like an interesting enough plot, but I wasn't sure how it would play out in practice. And I remember reading if you've read these books, if you haven't, there's chapters where you go into the mind of the killer that they're trying to find, and they are a little creepy, but not in a putting off way, because again, I don't really like super scary things or super suspenseful or thrillers, but this was suspenseful enough that I couldn't stop reading it, and I actually started it on audiobook because I really didn't expect to like it that much, and I thought it was going to be slower, which I should have known better, because Jennifer Lynn Barnes writes no slow books. As I was reading, I had to finish it, to finish the book. I picked up my physical copy and I finished it. Again, read this in probably 24 hours, which is really rare for me because I work full-time. I really, really enjoyed this book. It was so good, and the whole series was amazing. Like, definitely a 5-star series. I thought the buildup of the plot and getting to the last book where everything kind of came together from the previous 3 books was just amazing. So yeah, definitely recommend this series, and especially this first book, because I loved it. Coming in at number 4, this book was actually a 4.5 for me. I think my reason for that is because at the very end, I just wanted more. I felt like we just jumped too quick after everything had happened. It just, if you've read it, you understand what I'm saying. It just jumped too quick and it lost half a star for me because I just wanted more after all of the build-up. But just like I was saying about Jennifer Lynn Barnes, Rebecca Ross never disappoints me. I love this series. Divine Rivals is probably one of my favorite books of all time, and I loved Ruthless Vows in addition, and this was a great addition to the series, the duology. I really enjoyed reading like more of the lore and getting more of the world, and now I'm curious if I go back and read Divine Rivals if I'll pick up on some of the things that were built on in here, because there were definitely a lot of references to things that happened in those 2 books in this book that was clearly set up, and I just think that's so clever that she was kind of able to reverse engineer that way and make this book relate to those and just create this whole world that we can get to be a part of. I really enjoyed this book. Matilda was all heart, and I loved that about her. I think that's something that's really special about Rebecca Ross's characters, is that her women are so strong, but still very soft and feminine, and I love that about them. I really enjoyed reading Matilda's story and how she was part of 2 different worlds and how those different worlds related to each other, and reading about the gods and the drama between the gods and the goddesses and the matriarchs of both places. It was just really neat to get more of a background and an inside look to the series that I already love so much, but again, lost half a star for me because I just wished that there was more at the end, but I couldn't stop thinking about it either, so I knew it had to be in my top 10, and even though it's above some of my 5-star reads, which doesn't really make sense, in my head it makes sense because I just loved this book so much. Coming in at number 3, I don't have this book because I read it on audio from the library, but I would like to get a copy of it at some point. It is Sunrise on the Reaping. Oh my, I mean, it's been so many years since I read a Hunger Games book. but this just transports you right back into the world and helps you remember why you loved it so much. Probably because it broke your heart and made you cry all the time. I had a really hard time getting through parts of this book, but I'm so excited to see the movie, but also nervous to see the movie, because when Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes came out, I really, really loved the book. And then I went to see it in the movie and I felt so disappointed because I just felt like they cut so much out of the book that made it seem like the torment that President Snow was going through was a lot deeper than it actually seemed in the movie. And I really missed that part of the book when I watched the movie, so I feel a little nervous that they're gonna do something like that in Sunrise on the Reaping. And there were so many things. I can't say too much because if you haven't read it, I mean, you know, it's about Haymitch. So Haymitch gets pulled for the Quarter Quell, and it's just his story going through the Hunger Games, and it really gives you a backstory as to why he is the way he is, and it really breaks your heart, just like every other Hunger Games book does. But yeah, I loved the book so much. There are so many big plot points, especially in the games. Even, I will say, this is probably one of the books in the series that was less about the games. Even though the games were obviously a big part, there was a lot of the book before the games and a lot of the book after the games that just gave you more insight into who Haymitch was and the relationships that he had. But I'll just be interested to see just how they put it into the movie and what that looks like, and I pray that they don't mess it up the way that I felt like they messed up Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Coming in at number 2 is Red Rising by Pierce Brown. I really didn't expect to like this book that much. It's classified as sci-fi. I wouldn't personally classify it as sci-fi, but there are sci-fi elements, I will say. One of the planets that it takes place on is Mars. There are some different sci-fi components like the technology and stuff like that, but I would say it's more like a dystopian novel, and it has some fantasy or sci-fi elements ingrained in it. But if you're into dystopian, I would say this would be a good book to read. It was a little slow at the beginning and a little bit confusing because there are different classes. It's a caste system essentially. So Red, which the main character, his name is Darrow, he's a Red, and so you find out why it's called Red Rising as you read the book. But Reds are the lowest class, and then there's a bunch of other colors that classify the other classes, and it's a little confusing until you start to understand what the difference is between those things. And each of the classes also kind of has its own job. In this way, I felt like it was very much like the Hunger Games because each district had its own kind of thing, and in this case, each color had its own thing and its own job and their own roles to play in society. It was such a good book. I felt like I could not put it down at certain points. Just started book 2, and it's definitely a lot more fast-paced. And there's clearly so much more to uncover because there are 6 books in the series currently, and when I was going through Goodreads for new 2026 releases next year, there's a 7th one coming out. That will be an auto-buy for me because I am just really enjoying this series. I think Pierce Brown is a great writer. I enjoy the way that he writes. It's not like any other author that I've read before, especially with a dystopian, fantastical, sci-fi-ish type of novel. So I'm really enjoying this series. I highly recommend this if you're interested in dystopian with some sci-fi elements, and don't let the sci-fi part scare you off because I'm not really a sci-fi fan, but I really loved this book. And coming in, my top book of the year of 2025, and it is Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. This book, what do I even say about this book that hasn't already been said? I will say I did not expect to like it, which I've said about a lot of these books, and I think it's funny that the books that you expect not to like end up on your top 10. This book is about a woman named Tova, and her son mysteriously disappeared years ago. She works at an aquarium. Her son was very interested in marine biology. I think it was marine biology. He was very interested in something in the ocean or fishing, something along those lines. I read it at the beginning of the year, so the details are a little fuzzy. But Tova works at this aquarium, and one of the characters that you follow is actually the octopus that lives at the aquarium. And when I listened to it on audiobook. When I first started listening to it, I really was not sure I was gonna like it because the octopus, I just didn't like him as a character. I just really didn't like the octopus. His name was Marcellus, I think, if I remember right. I really didn't like Marcellus. I thought he was very cynical, and I just didn't enjoy his point of view very much. There's a third character that you follow. I can't remember his name. It might have been Cameron. There's an expiration date on an octopus that lives in an aquarium, so he's like approaching this expiration date. This book is so much about relationships and helping each other out. It just really, I feel like, restores your faith in humanity a little bit, and even though it's not a true story, it just makes you think things like this could happen all the time, and people really could be good to each other and not judge each other based on their appearances, but really do things that help each other. I really don't know what to say about this book, except that if you haven't read it, I highly recommend that you read it in 2026. I'm not a big crier when it comes to books. I feel like I'm more of a visual person, and so I'll cry more if I'm watching a TV show or a movie, and it's really hard to make me cry with a book, but I cried so hard when I finished this book. It was just so beautiful, and I still think about it all the time, and that is why it is my top book of the year for 2025. Well, that is all for my first video. That was my top 10 books from 2025. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit like, subscribe. Thanks so much for being here, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.